upstairs, 2 floors upstairs in our Ubuntu lounge for a special member mix-up. So do join us and form some new connections upstairs after this. But before you do, if you haven't already, make sure to buy a copy of Eric's book, which he'll be signing at the back of the room. So Eric Collins is a serial entrepreneur, investor, technology executive, and television host. Alongside being one of the most influential and effective change makers in Britain, he was appointed by President Obama to the Small Business Administration's Council on Underserved Communities, and spent much of his career building the value of digital companies through innovative strategies at public and private companies. In this new book, which came out just a matter of a few weeks ago, We Don't Need Permission: How Black Business Can Change the World, he argues investing in Black and underrepresented entrepreneurs is the surest, fastest, socio-economic game changer that there is. Interviewing Eric this evening is another inspiring change maker from the Conduit ecosystem, Patricia Hamzahay. Patricia is a philanthropist and impact investor who is passionate about responsible capitalism and working to diversify access to funding. As a Conduit Impact Champion, she's helped to bring racial equity as an important focus for the Conduit community, and we're deeply grateful and indebted to her for her work in that regard. This evening, we're also hugely grateful to TGRG and Juanita, who has helped pull a lot of this evening together. And thank you, Juanita. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Eric and Patricia.
Yeah, it feels like we're on a perch here. First of all, I really wanted to say I'm so delighted to be able to have this conversation with Eric. I've known Eric for some time now. I'm actually an early investor in Impact X, which is his groundbreaking fund that does support Black and other diverse founders, and particularly here in the UK, but obviously it has an international scope as well. I also know him because we're both American, and we've been here a very long time, and I do think you will even see it in the book, a little bit of the lens that we bring to looking at racial equity as it manifests itself in this country, I think is incredibly valuable, and he does it really well, and I think when you do get the book and read the book, you'll find that as well. We also share a passion for the arts. I hound him a lot on different things, different exhibitions, different performances, different productions, and he is an investor in the creative space, which is also quite important. And I suppose probably more importantly, and it's also reflected in the book, is that I co-founded something called Extend Ventures, and he cites some of the research that we did looking at the space of the investment that goes to diverse founders in this country. And he generously has quoted much of the statistics, and I might let him share it. If he doesn't share it, I will certainly share it. But that generosity that he brings to everything that he does is just really in a way, not unusual, but just sets an example. And I think, in a way, within the Black business ecosystem in particular, I would say, that we need that generosity, we need that sense of collaboration, we need that sense of community bringing us together so that we can make a difference. And I think you will see that much in this book. The one thing I want to say about this book, besides it's the most brilliant book, it shares lessons. He gives these really 10 sort of key tools and perspectives on how an entrepreneur can manifest themselves through the journey, but drawing on all of his extensive experience, definitely. But one thing I just wanted to say, which really made me happy when I saw this book on the first instance, on the cover, from The Times, the lovely newspaper, The Times, they say, one of the most powerful business people in Britain. Not one of the most powerful Black business people in Britain, but one of the most powerful business people in Britain. I think that says a huge amount. So, Eric. Yes. So, I'm just going to invite you. You do so many things, right? You run an investment fund. You go on television. Doing the moneymaker. You work in all sorts of fields. But to take time out to write this book, which again is a resource, a must-read resource for anyone who wants, not just a Black entrepreneur, but anyone who really wants to start a business. This is a must-read. I just really, as a first question for you, just really wanted to know why. Why?
Can I start by saying thank you? Because I do want to say thank you to Patricia, Juanita, the conduit, and to the various people who are here in the audience. It is not lost on me that the conversation about, what are some solutions in the struggle for social justice and particularly Black empowerment, that sometimes talking about business might feel a little dry. So we're going to try not to make it a dry conversation, but in my opinion, it is something which does need to have its airing. Thank you, Patricia, for being an early investor in ImpactX. Without ImpactX has been my platform here in the UK. We are investing in underrepresented entrepreneurs in the UK as well as in Europe. We invest in digital technology, health education, lifestyle, and media and entertainment because it is our firm belief, and because of people who let us have their money to invest with the hope of getting a return, that we are going to produce, because there's a woman, a young Black woman in Bristol, there's an Asian woman in Edinburgh, there is someone in the South End who is going to produce a company that is like Spotify and is going to be as influential, as important as Spotify. And if indeed we had a woman of color who had started an organization like Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Netflix, we would be having that person who has a very different sort of a relationship to race and gender. We wouldn't have to go through so much DEI retrofitting of organizations, because they would start by thinking that women and people of color make sense in the C-suite. They would say, as opposed to what we have here in the UK, which is there are 0 people of color, there are 0 Black people who are in a FTSE 100 company in the chair position, in the CEO position, in the COO position, or the CTO position. The same holds true for the FTSE 200. The same holds true for the FTSE 300. There are 0 people that actually exist who are Black in any of those companies in roles that are considered executive roles. But if we had a Black woman who had started Google, we would have a person who would actually be involved in interesting conversations, would be creating tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs, and we'd find that people who are in P&L responsible roles, who are in the engineering organization, those places would be occupied by those people. So this book is really intended to not just say go out and start any sort of business. We're looking for large-scale businesses, and ImpactX is an organization that's doing the same thing. We want to make sure that we are incubating businesses that produce real impact. So this is one. Now, you asked the question of why I wrote the book. That was a question, right? I'm getting there, you all. Now you're going to see how I talk. I had never intended to write a book, Patricia. It's not one of those aspirations that I had. There are lots of people who feel as though they have a book in them. Maybe you in the audience, it's like, I've got a book. And then you come here and you say, if Eric can write a book, I can certainly write a book. So maybe that's what's going on. But for me, it was not this idea that I should be sort of putting forward a manifesto about change. Someone actually approached me from a publisher and said, Eric, we think that there's an interesting book based on the work that you've done. Why don't you take a little time and sort of write an outline for us, and then we'll see if we go from there. And that's what started the process. It had me actually thinking. I worked with a woman named Eva Simpson, who writes she has a column that she writes on a weekly basis. She also has a firm that is doing PR and comms. She helped me to sort of refine it. We then found an agent. So listen to this. So Eva Simpson, she's a Black British woman. We found an agent, Natalie Jerome. She's a Black British woman. She found us a publisher, a person named Andrea Henry. She's a Black British woman. So there were 3 Black British women who made sure that this book happened. And that's part of our conversation tonight, sort of the role of Black British women, Black women around the world in terms of the ability to be part of, and actually the key, in my opinion, one of the key ingredients to actually get social change is through working with women and making sure that women are in charge of things. So we should talk about that sometime.
I mentioned earlier that one of these sort of landmark pieces of statistics that Eric had so generously shared in his book comes from Excellent Ventures, was an organization that I work with. And just on the subject of Black women, we did extensive research of 10 years of venture capital funding, which is the startup funding stream for startup businesses. And we found by the end of 2019, 10 years up to the end of 2019, that out of the total percentage of VC funding available, 11% went to women. Still, if you think 50% of the population is women, that's a pretty sad statistic. 0.24% went to Black founders. But even more, I would say, shocking is 0.02% went to Black female founders. That really equated to one woman, okay, who raised any significant amount of money. The most important thing about that is when we published that statistic, and lots of people, ooh, wow, surprise, surprise, then the next year, so that came out in the early 2020. In 2021, maybe we think, at Excellent Ventures, just the shock of such appalling statistics, 16 Black women entrepreneurs got funding following just the visibility of those poor statistics. And I just think a large part of it is visibility. And again, that's the other reason why I think this book is important, is because Eric spends a lot of time sharing the kind of the complex history and stories that underpin where Black businesses are here in this country, but also drawing on a legacy from the United States that is actually very rich in what they can do. And I think he has a whole chapter on Black female entrepreneurs in this book, which we'll get to. But I kind of wanted to start with something else that he bravely, to me, you do. So in polite conversations in this country, these words are very rarely said. Okay, and he features these words in this book frequently, and maybe not even in the context that you might hear these words, but in a much broader, more systemic way. And it is the word systemic. He talks about systemic racism, okay? And I think all of us can agree that that's not something that's a normal part of the dialogue here, but to understand and unpick the challenges, I really, again, I think Eric has been courageous to place it firmly at the heart of the book.
In my opinion, the systemic issues that are facing women and people of color in the UK are paramount to explaining sort of the outcomes that we're seeing today. May I share some statistics? May I share some statistics? So you all, I'm going to show you some statistics about the financial state of Black Britain and why women can't wait for permission. This is, so Patricia and I have talked through some of this, but let me just share some of these numbers with you. These are, and I'm going to run through some of these very quickly, and you'll understand why, hopefully, toward the end of this. It's only about 3 slides. 1 in 2 Black children live below the poverty line in the UK. Let's be clear. That's, if you were to look to your right and look to your left, if you're just to look to your right, don't look to your left, but look to your right, one of you, if you were a Black child in the UK, is living below the poverty line today. This number is taken from a 2018 study. So if you think about this, this is pre-COVID and this is pre the what is it called? The cost of living crisis that we're facing today. That is the state of most Black Britons who are Black, who are children. That's 1 in 5, when we compare it to their white peers, they're 1 in 5 who live in poverty. 20% of Black Britons own their own home. These are all showing us examples of why this is such an insidious problem and why it's so systemic. If we're saying that children are generally poor and Black people are generally poor because these are in households, then we're also saying that there are very few households that own their own home. We know that home ownership is the basis of most people's wealth. It then leads to the next fact, that Black Britons have 1/8 the net wealth as their white peers. So if we're looking at a Black household, the adults in the household are worth about $24,000 per adult if you're a Black person, and if you're a white person, it's $197,000 per person. So that is sort of this Russian doll of problems that you have to solve if you're trying to solve the problem of black empowerment and financial inclusion. Let's go to the next point. In the US, I couldn't find this number for the UK, but in the US, the median net worth, if you're a black business owner, is 12 times higher. So if you are employed by yourself, it is likely that you have 12 times the amount of wealth that you do if you're working for somebody else. Think about that for a second. So if you are sitting there and you're working for someone else, you are generally poorer than someone who is working for themselves. So if we're looking for solutions, the solutions of, well, let's go work for them, is not necessarily something that's going to lead to wealth accumulation, is what we've noted in terms of the world. And then the last piece is just a sort of a throwaway, that when we look at inheritance, which is another opportunity for intergenerational wealth transfer, there's about 1/4, a quarter of what white households are able to receive from inheritance is what black households receive from inheritance. Let's quickly run through just a few more. Oh, I got it right. So this is about black business, because Patricia and I are firm believers that one of the ways in which we actually build sustainable solutions and we actually are able to fund what is necessary in terms of moments and movements for perpetuation and sustainability is if we are actually building black businesses. SMEs are the largest category by far for businesses in the UK, and Black Britons only make up about 2.4, about a quarter of a percent of that population of SME businesses. In the US, there are about 9.2 million minority-owned small businesses and about 11.7 million women-owned businesses. The reason I want to focus on this is because of the women-owned business pieces. Black women are the fastest growing demographic of business starters in the world today, at least when we're talking about the US and the UK, in both populations. The interesting thing about that is, insofar as they are growing those businesses, are they growing it because they want to? There are all sorts of ideas that they want to incubate. They really do believe that they can build the next IBM or the next Microsoft. Is some of it because we're trying to replace income that is otherwise being lost because of the kinds of work that we actually find as frontline workers? Or is it because we are also the first to be let go in an economic downturn and we have to find something to do? So it becomes a hustle that actually has to supplement our income. These are all interesting questions. The top 3 sources of startup funding for all businesses are personal savings, bank loans, and credit cards. If you're a black woman, which one do you think you use most frequently? Absolutely. Credit cards are the dominant form that is actually used by people of color. If you are white, which one are you using most likely? Personal savings. You have personal savings, and you also get much more bank loans. Go on to the next one. If you look at minority-owned businesses, you're less likely to be approved for financing than white businesses, when white business owners, even if you have the same annual receipts. That's systemic racism. That's what Patricia was talking about, right? So if you go and you look and you say, well, we put things and we've lined up people, when you say, what is the difference between this entrepreneur and this entrepreneur, what you will find is that if you're a black entrepreneur, you are much less likely to be approved for a loan. In fact, in the UK, you're 4 times less likely to get a loan if you're black than if you are white. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about on these slides was that 99% of businesses never raise venture capital. Patricia and I are partners in a venture capital firm. This is a very small portion of the population that will ever use venture capital. To be clear, though, venture capital is the ingredient which has actually incubated the biggest businesses in the world and the most valuable businesses in the world, other than, what's the most valuable business in the world? The Saudi oil company? Okay, so it is an oil company, an extractive resource company. When you look at the Fortune 500, for instance, the most important companies and the biggest companies are the Apples, the Amazons, and others in terms of their valuations. Those are all companies that had venture capital to start them. So venture capital to grow really large-scale businesses does seem to be an important ingredient. Take a look at this. Over the last 10 years, this is exactly what Patricia was talking about, so we don't need to repeat that point about how much venture capital black entrepreneurs are able to raise, and particularly black female entrepreneurs. The next point is, though, that exactly that one person raised in a Series B or a Series A versus as a black woman, as opposed to 194 white female entrepreneurs. Educational background is very interesting, and people talk about this as being a class dynamic, but again, I think this is a question of systemic racism and white supremacy. Educational background impacts funding options, where 43% of funding at UK seed stage go to only 4 places. If you went to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, or Stanford, you are much more likely to be able to get venture capital, you're much more likely to be able to be prime minister, you're much more likely to be able to run an arts organization, you're much more likely to be able to belong to a club like this. All of those things are actual drivers of behavior. You do know this, right? Here in the UK in particular, right? We know that how many prime ministers have ever not gone to Oxford or Cambridge? Is it one? Ever. Yeah, it's a very small number, if anyone. So it's like the power, the chambers of power are dominated by these small spaces. And US venture capital investing in black women was at an all-time high in 2021. That's a number from the US, and it's been trending down ever since. So to be clear, even though we were in the biggest period in terms of economic growth and investment of capital in third parties through venture capital in 2020 up into the very beginning of 2021, at some point, black women in particular began to see, earlier than the rest of the market, a downturn in terms of investment in them. These are the statistics. We don't make these up. We take them from these very credible sources, and this is what we're talking about in terms of why we don't need permission is necessary, a change of mindset, and why we actually have to do something proactive today. And at some point during this conversation, Patricia and I do want to talk with you about what are you going to do today? Because quite frankly, I'm not here to entertain. That's not what I do, right? We are here to evoke and to provoke people to do something, all right? So if you're here, good luck on getting out of here without making a commitment to doing something.
And that's an important message, particularly in this space, because the conduit. I joined the conduit because it was a space for people who are seeking to make social change. And that's the sort of rationale for this community. And that's why we're delighted to kind of make that challenge to this community to help make sure that social change is really high on the agenda. I wanted to go quickly to 2 things on Eric's slides that I think he will appreciate. I helped to organize a business breakfast last Black History Month, actually, for the Black Business Show. And one of the speakers alongside Eric was a very senior banker who specializes in bank loans to Black businesses. And he's basically said, for most entrepreneurs, that personal loans, personal savings, bank loans, and credit cards. In the Black community, culturally, taking on debt is something that is quite complicated and difficult for many Black entrepreneurs to do. It's just, you're encouraged not to take on debt. But the downside of that is that in order to get on in business, in order to get other loans and so on, you need a credit profile. So if you don't take on the debt, then you're at a serious disadvantage. So there's some sort of cultural hurdles that we have to get over in order to establish ourselves strongly in the business startup space. And we, all of us, and there are several of us in this room, advocate around building Black businesses, and this is the kind of thing that we try to do to help support the ecosystem. And the other thing that Eric touched on was just Black female empowerment, and why do Black women start their own businesses? And yes, there's a good hustle, they want to do a creative idea, but the reality is necessity is the mother of invention. Most Black women, at least a lot of the ones I know, but also going back in history, I'm talking, there's a whole history of amazing Black female entrepreneurs who have created some of the most iconic things that we would consider, daily, products and services now. But they did it because they had to do it. It was the only way they were going to make ends meet. It was the only way they were going to support their families. If you give a Black woman 1 penny, she's going to make it a pound. That's just the way we work. And I think, that sense of necessity has been a real driver. And I think when Eric says, invest in Black female entrepreneurs, it's because he knows that drive, that ambition, that resilience is in Black women who can make a real success. And I think, I don't know, you might be able to share a few of the women that you've seen as icons in that space.
Absolutely. Do you all know, so do you know Pat McGrath? Okay, so you all know Pat McGrath, but for those of you who don't, Pat McGrath she features heavily in this book, and rightly so. Well, I'll do a little aside. This is an admission, I'm confessing amongst ourselves, it's just us here in the room, right? I was in Selfridges the other day, just because I was doing a social experiment, looking at things. So I was walking through and I saw Pat McGrath Labs on the makeup floor. You know, some sensational display, lots and lots of retail space. And it occurred to me, here is Pat McGrath, who has created out of, seemingly nowhere, a multi-billion-pound company. Pat McGrath Labs is a makeup company. Pat McGrath, she grew up in a household with a mother who was very, very creative and liked clothes. And she would, she'd use all sorts of materials and all sorts of embellishments. Pat then took that and translated it into makeup. Pat McGrath became one of the leading makeup artists in the world, doing all the fashion shows, doing all of the editorial. She's good friends with Edward Enninful, so of course she's featured very, very frequently in Vogue and the like. But more importantly, in my estimation, is that Pat has not just made this to make herself into a social media influencer, which is fine. She has made herself into a corporation that employs other people. They manufacture, they distribute, and then they actually collect revenues. And this multi-billion pound organization that she has been able to create is one that, if you ask me, is a good example of what is a traditional sort of a business that women are expected to be in. So if you think about it, what is it, Charlotte Tilbury, isn't that a brand? That's a British brand. You think about Max, you think about Bobbi Brown. You think about all of these makeup lines. There's the category called femtech. Do you know femtech? So femtech is this sort of idea that there are women-oriented technologies that are very useful. Sometimes it's around health issues, sort of like menstruation or menopause. But there are these sort of technologies that are being developed, especially for a female market. And the interesting thing is that's an expectation that women should be seen in those sorts of spaces. Likewise, there are places that are non-traditional. So there's a woman named Cathy Hughes. Have any of you ever heard of Cathy Hughes in Radio 1? So Cathy Hughes is interesting because Cathy Hughes is one of the first black female billionaires, self-made billionaires. There's also Sheila Johnson, who partnered with her husband, Bob Johnson, who started BET. But you have Cathy Hughes. Cathy Hughes started she bought a radio station, well, she worked for a radio station, then she bought some radio stations, then she created a network of radio stations in the United States, hundreds of them, and then started a thing called TV One. So she also has then a television network, and the television network does not only sort of, things which would be reruns, but then they also do now original programming. And she floated that company on an American stock exchange. I don't know whether it's NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. I'll check my facts and get back to you. But here's a person who then took what is a traditional space, super serving the black community. Have you ever heard of the Quiet Storm? Do you know the Quiet Storm is a format? It's sort of, in the evening, you have the quiet storm. So you have this person with a fantastic voice on the radio helping to put you into the mood for sleep, to help you put you in the mood for sleep. And so you have the quiet storm. So she was the one who started that format that then became a phenomenon around the United States. And that also is some of the innovation. But black music, from Motown to, Beyonce, is something that everyone expects black people to be able to do very, very well. Sometimes even to be able to make a business of it. So you have BET, which is Black Entertainment Television. You've had Ebony Magazine. You have The Voice. You have, you have all sorts of things. You have, Mixtape Madness. You have lots of things which are considered appropriate places for black people to actually be working. If you're going to do that, my suggestion is you do it like Cathy Hughes and you really supersize it. You super serve and you get to the point that you're able to employ, again, not just tens, not just hundreds, but thousands and thousands of people and make lots and lots of not only billionaires, but then a lot of millionaires and a lot of thousandaires underneath you. And again, because you're a woman and you're a woman of color, the likelihood that you are going to credit women and other people of color as being worthwhile in your organization is much higher. And again, I don't have to go through this retrofitting for DEI that I'm so tired of hearing about all the time. All right, so that's what we're looking for, and these are some examples, some tangible examples today, and if you don't know them, they're in the book, so feel free to read about them in the book, but these are some people that you should know about, and I think there are some stories, and these are also stories that are very much about people starting with almost no capital. There is none of this is venture capital. You know, all of this is bootstrapped. Both of those people bootstrap. They get investors eventually, but they don't start off with investors. After all, they're black women, and there's only one black woman in the UK who up until, 3 years ago had actually raised £1 million. So they aren't going to be out there. They're no one's search image. So they have to do it themselves.
And I think that's really the important thing about the bootstrapping. And that's across all the black business ecosystem itself. And you know, most of these businesses that are started are bootstrapped. You know, they don't have access to funding. That's the perennial problem that black businesses face in this country. But for black women in particular, you know, the concept of just, again, taking that penny and making it a pound, you know, if someone gets a $800 and is able to create a business, start a business from that very small starting place. But I will say, Eric, everything that you shared and the great stories, and definitely delve into the book to find out more. There are many more, but they are all American. Okay. Except for Pat, but she made her business in America. I'm just gonna say, you know. So I want to take our gaze here, okay? Because I think it's really important that we understand what's the dynamic and what needs to shift here. Because for me, we've not discussed it, so I don't know if you will agree. There has been a boom in funding for black businesses. You know, there has been, because of George Floyd and, you know, the disproportionality of COVID, lots of reasons, companies, banks, finance, investment companies have sort of committed themselves to investing in black business. We've seen that. We don't know how long it's gonna last. We don't think it's gonna last that long, but it's there. But almost all of them are from America, here. It's Morgan Stanley, it's Google, you know, it's Bank of America, it's SoftBank, it's, I have yet to see British companies, British banks, British firms stepping up to that. And I just wanted to know, you know, in terms of what you see in the ecosystem and the horizon, is that fair? And do you think, can we shift the dial to ensure that in Britain, there's a much more domestic base of support for black businesses?
Oh, you have really hit a nerve of mine. I am telling you, one of the things that I find fantastic in terms of my conversations with I came to Britain back in 2014, my family moved here, and I became a British citizen in 2020. And many people will ask me, do I see any differences between the US and the UK, and what are those major differences? And I always answer there are no differences that are significant enough. What people really want to ask me about this is what they want to ask me, is Eric, is racism worse in the UK or the US? That's what they really want to ask me. And of course, my answer is, all racism is malignant. So whether or not it feels a little less like you're being whipped every day versus, just being ignored every day, it's still leading to the same result. Because I can name statistic after statistic, particularly the one about young black children here in the UK, that indicates that there's a real problem that goes very, very deep. So whether or not people believe they have a race issue, they have a race issue. And this is not a class issue, it is a race issue. So let's just be clear. So when I am looking at the UK and I think about all the places where we have the opportunity, and this is me as Eric Collins, adopted Brit, we have the opportunity to really make a change. One of the places that I'd like to see that change start is at government. In the United States, the reason I even know Cathy Hughes is because Cathy Hughes was the chair of the committee that Barack Obama appointed me to on how do we look at underserved communities, business communities, and how do we get more capital to them. She chaired that committee. That committee was out of the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration came because there was a desire and a need to make sure that we were actually helping economically to advantage the country by helping people who were these small businesses we talked about are the predominant form of business here in the UK. There were all sorts of things that were done, including set-aside programs. And those set-aside programs were that if you were going to be a supplier to the United States government, you had to have a certain amount of your contracts that went to black women and women-led businesses. There were other categories also, but those were requirements. You could not work for the government if you did not do these things. And that helped to spawn a whole series, a whole group of very effective suppliers. And it helped to create lots of jobs, and it helped to do a number of things, which are, continuing to this very day. They also were the major backer for many investment firms. Just like in the UK has a British Business Bank. Do you know the British Business Bank? So the British Business Bank is I don't know exactly where it gets its money, but it has about $3 billion to invest in fund managers. The interesting thing is the Small Business Administration has more and has been doing it for a longer period of time, but they invest in fund managers, and they're often the leading LP in lots and lots of funds. And they actually have a special program for Black and women-led venture funds. And that is where much of the capital, so in the United States you have 300 Black VCs that at the moment are either have a mandate to invest in women and people of color, or have are raising money in order to do that. Here in the UK, you don't have all of that. The British Business Bank has never really backed a Black fund manager. A Black fund manager. Now, if you define Black here in the UK as anyone who's not white, they have. But if you talk about people who are either Afro-Caribbean or African, British, Caribbean British, African American British, then there have been zero. And so those types of things are absolutely these insidious ways, and it's all done under the guise of fairness, that we just have a fair and open system and we treat everyone the same, and it's just no Black person, no Black fund manager ever makes it through the system. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But that is what we continue to face in terms of the question of, do British companies support the idea that what we should be doing and what we could be doing is actually helping the bottom line of our country by investing in Black? Let me show you why. I'm going to show you some more statistics. That indeed, that's it. So, capital is the lifeblood of all organizations. So, Black entrepreneurs are almost 3 times as likely as their white peers to have negative profitability impacts due to the lack of access to capital. Because they don't have access to capital, they're not able to build the businesses that they'd like to. And I jump straight from this top point to the bottom point. Because we are not building the businesses that could be built by Black people, and part of that is because there's never enough capital to go into those Black businesses, what we end up with is a study that shows us that in the UK, Black businesses in total, because we're underinvesting in them, we're losing about 75 billion in lost GDP annually. Could do something with this mini budget, right? To help with that mini budget, if we actually had some of those businesses that were actually paying corporate taxes and that sort of thing. In addition, there's been another study that says specifically Black Britain, that's African, Caribbean, and African American, that accounts for about 25 billion plus of that 75 billion that could come to the economy. It's even worse in the United States, though. It is estimated, and this is truly a Black figure, that it's closer to $1 trillion a year that is lost from the economy, the GDP, because there's an underinvestment in Black business. That is the problem, you all. It's not just, nothing happens. It's because these companies would never grow. They wouldn't be good companies anyway. What we're actually doing is losing our ability to put money into economy because we are underinvesting in individuals and organizations that could actually make a difference to the economy. That's the only other piece I want to state.
And just, I want to add one more statistic as well. You may know about this, but Citibank did a big piece of research, and this again is a US statistic, but I think we could write it across to the UK, that they basically found that $17 trillion was lost over 20 years to the US economy due to racial inequality. $17 trillion, and just think about the percentages you could think about when you look at 25 billion boost to UK GDP if we took away the racial barriers that Black businesses face. We're going to do questions after, but we do have a good hand up. Akil, if you want to ask.
So thank you, firstly. Secondly, the UK government is busy. Let's put it that way. And so with the UK government being so busy, what is a practical way we can start with what we have? And what's a practical way we can start addressing the requirement for inward investment into black businesses with what we have today.
When you say busy doing what?
Well,
I'm
busy is
sort of
the
curious.
very polite way of putting it. They're busy taking away
Oh,
democracy.
okay.
Yeah, you with me?
I kind of understand. Let me tell you what happens in Eric's mind. In Eric's mind, in 2018, 1 in 2 black children live below the poverty line. Ukraine has been invaded. 1 in 2 black children live below the poverty line. Inflation continues to go up. 1 in 2 black children live below the poverty line. There's a crisis in terms of the cost of living. 1 in 2 black children live below the poverty line. That doesn't change after the Ukraine is done. And at some point, maybe it'll take just decades from now, that will be done. And we will still have this problem. So in my opinion, and if it hasn't been addressed over the course of the years that I have been here in the UK, and it doesn't seem to ever get to the top of anyone else's agenda, it is at the top of my agenda. So if we are going to solve this, and I hope it's on the top of some of your agendas too, if we are going to solve this problem, then the question is, how are we going to get it solved? Are we going to go begging hat in hand to government and say, government, can you please believe in what we do? Can you please take some time on this issue? I know you're busy with other things. Please, please, please. The same thing that we do when we go to funders and we go to commissioning agents. It's like, oh, Commissioner, BBC, can you please put on this television show about black people because it is so important to my community? And then you have to, persuade, cajole, change around your initial ideas into something which is watered down to be acceptable. All of those are the realities of life. I get it. One of the reasons why it's a reality of life is because there's never enough capital within the community of black people in order to be able to fund their own initiatives, including the political heft to continue to say, we insist that these things be focused on. If Elon Musk is on one more newspaper and gets one more column inch and gets to talk about everything from Ye straight through to whether or not we go to space, but there's never a black woman who gets to have that same conversation. He gets to talk about sort of who gets to be employed and what are employment ideas and ideals in various countries around the world because he has plants around the world. There's no black woman who gets to be involved in those conversations. These are problems, you all. This is the nature of being disempowered. Building the businesses, which within a generation, that's the other piece about this. I don't have, I'm old. I don't have time to wait for, the vote to happen and then the person to come into power and them to actually consolidate sufficient power to then make a change and then have something implemented and then everybody die out who's standing in the way for us to then get the change. One of the ways to do that is by utilizing business and using our pounds and pence to make sure happen deliberately what we want to have happen. So in my opinion, okay, the government's fine. The government should do what the government's going to do as long as I have enough capital to make sure that they continue to have to come to me to say, because Eric, we really need your money. We really need your input. We couldn't make a decision without you. And one of the reasons we can't is because your business is important enough that we know that we need to refer to you. When we get to, I know I will be empowered and black people will be empowered when there's a black woman that someone comes to and says, that's what we have to do in order to get an answer. In order to be able to function, we've got to go to her. All right? So. Okay. Say it again. I can't hear.
What's step one?
Build a business.
Thank
Build a
you.
big business. That's your step. That's the whole thing. We don't need permission to build a big business. If you don't hear anything else, build a big business. I do not care about the mom and pop grocery store. I do not care about the restaurant. Those things are so important, you all. Hear me saying I don't care because I believe we've had that for generations. We have 1 in 2 black children who still live in poverty, right? We've never had a FTSE 100, 200, or 300 company started by a black person. We've never had a Fortune 500 company started by a black person. We've never controlled that much resource, employed that many people. That's what we're looking to do, all right? We don't need 9,000 of them, but we need 900. We need 9. We need 90.
And I just wanted to add a little bit on to that in the sense that there are some very successful black businesses in this country, people who have built brands, recognizable brands, et cetera, who they're not yet at the 100 million plus stage, but they're in the 10s, 20s, 20, 50 million stage and have aspirations to be bigger. But even they, with all the success they've managed to carve out for themselves, are facing huge barriers to be able to go to that next step. and they have seats at the table. They have a seat at the table, but they still have facing those barriers. So I think, I applaud Eric about having that ambition. Okay, absolutely. If we don't have that ambition, we're not going to change things much. I will disagree a little bit with Eric about the mom and pops, the restaurants, the fashion businesses, the smaller businesses, because in a way that is a large part of our ecosystem. That's where the hustle comes. That's where the families put food on the table because they can make those things meet. And I'm just talking as the Black community in particular, we need to support those businesses. We need, we talk about, in your book, you talk about Buy Black. We need, to know that our community wealth is only going to be built if we build it, if we're making the investment ourselves. And that's the kind of encouragement I would say.
And please don't take away from here that I don't want people to start small businesses. But what I do think is very, very important, and it is the backbone of community. The notes are here, the data is actually there. The thing that I want us to think about is that there will be a Black woman from Birmingham who can start a huge scale business. That's what we're looking to have happen, all right? And we need to support that because, again, that is game changing, and it's within a generation, it can really change the state of Black Britain. That's what we're looking to do.
I think we're going to move on to questions. One other point in Eric's book, that, again, encourage you, please buy and read, is the concept of impact and social impact. And one of the things that the Black entrepreneurs, Black business, a study just came out today, actually, that showed many people, especially the younger generation in our communities, are starting businesses with purpose. They want to fix a social problem. They want to address an inequity. They want to, make change in society. And I think that is really a powerful, sentiment and a powerful drive. And particularly in this space of social change, I think it's really important to know that that's really where people are motivated. Yes, of course, people want to be profitable, make money, but they also want to do that with a sense of purpose. And yeah. So, questions? That question.
Yes, right there. And I see Angela. Thank you all for coming. I see so many friends here.
Birmingham.
Hi Eric, congratulations on the book, and I'm sure it's filled with some wonderful insights. Tell me if I'm wrong, but the title itself implies to me that you think we have to have a radical change in terms of our mindset and our attitude if we can't navigate around the culture that's essentially a blocker. So I wondered how radical you think we need to be. Does it mean we have to be more bullish? Do we need to be more collaborative? Do we need to, in terms of trust ourselves and trust our community more? How radical do we have to think and change in our action and our mindset?
Can you tell that there's a person who's a presenter and has been doing this and asking the hard questions for some time? Thank you for the question. I do believe that a radical approach is something that probably most people, maybe so you all don't think is so radical. When we started ImpactX, have you ever heard this expression that Black people don't work well together? Mm-hmm. You have, okay. See? So it's a fascinating fallacy, and that's a sort of a mindset that, and when I started putting together ImpactX, you already know about Patricia, a whole group, the only people, if you go on our website, impactxcapital.com, I think www.impactxcapital.com, go look at it. We have pictures of the people who invested as our founding members. You'll notice something very similar about them all. They are Black Britons, they're Black Americans from the East and the West Coast, and they're Black French people. All of us have come to the conclusion that the only manner in which we can actually get something done is if we're doing it collectively. So that's one element of sort of a radical rethinking. Who can you rely upon? The other piece of that, which I think is even more radical, is this sort of turning on its head white supremacy. And when I say white supremacy, I mean for it to be provocative, but I also want you to think about it. Think to yourself, who is going to make you money? This is money you need. This is money that you have to have in order to pay your bills, in order to grow, in order to have your children go to school. Who are the people who are going to make money for you? And if your imagination doesn't instantly go to black women and black men, that's this internalized question of, is it always white people who are the individuals who are empowered and enabled to do those types of things? That kind of mindset shift is something which is very necessary. Another thing that I find here in the UK, which is fascinating to me, which I hadn't seen in the US as much, is this idea of exceptionalism, black exceptionalism. I'm the only one in my organization, and somehow that's a badge of courage, and that's a badge of honor. It's like, that's weird to me. This idea that I've made it, and I'm just a chocolatey out coating to a white inside. That's exactly what it is, right? I'm just like you, just like you, except I'm just chocolatey. And in my opinion, that is indeed the wrong approach. And the question of, should I actually make space for other people, and does it make the world better? Because we all know that diversity around the table gets better results because it actually creates some more sort of sometimes friction, which creates better ideas, and those ideas then lead to, in fact, companies that are venture backed that have a team that is not made up of all white men get a 30% premium at exit, and they raise more money. So it's like, there are benefits, and this is data that's been done over decades, but people somehow just don't believe it. When I think about the radical piece of this, though, the most radical piece for me is this idea that we are constantly going hat in hand to somebody. I worked for Channel 4, right? I was a host for Channel 4. I did this television show that happened for the strangest of reasons, but there I am at the moneymaker for Channel 4. I can then take them another idea and say, Channel 4, will you please show this? I want you to back this program. And I need you to believe in me. I need you to do this. And of course, what happens? They say, well, Eric, we like it a little bit, but could you do this? Could you change this? Could you alter this? Because we need the audience, because really the audience for Channel 4 is a 62-year-old white woman who lives in the Midlands. So your idea that's going to be this radical approach just doesn't appeal to our audience. And you end up asking for permission in particular ways. Maybe if I went to BET, it would be the same thing. Maybe if I went to MTN, it would be the same thing. But we have to sort of say, how are we always constantly requiring permission from somebody else? Please let me join your club. Please let me be part of this organization. And quite frankly, I think it's a strange thing, because the only reason people hire you in the first place is they want you to be successful. And I'm not sure that they then require you to change fundamentally who you are in order to be successful. They don't want to fire you. They want you to be successful. They want your authentic self there. So even within organizations, which are white-dominated organizations, I think we still ask for permission in ways that we don't have to. So that is a mindset which I do believe has to shift if we want to make the advances and strides that we need to in order to get black empowerment and social justice. On a systemic basis, not on an individual basis. I'm talking about systemic basis. Is that okay? Thank you.
A black woman from Birmingham. Stepping up.
It is true, I am a black woman from Birmingham. Eric, fascinating statistic. So just on Pat McGrath, before I ask the question, if anybody wants to know any more about her, she did a brilliant Desert Island Discs, which is, I hope, still on BBC Sounds. If anybody wants to know more, that's a great place to listen to her story. Just following up on what you just said, though, do you think that the government has got any part to play in how we move forward? I mean, only yesterday, Teresa Coffey, whose title I can't be bothered to remember because she'll probably be out next week, said, poor people are richer than you think.
I think government has a very big part to play in both the problem and the solution. I think about my tax dollars. Well, they're not dollars, they're pounds and pence. My pounds and pence that go on a monthly basis to the government, and I try and think to myself, how much of that is coming back to me in terms of empowerment and focusing on the things that I think are important. Certainly, I think roads are important. Certainly, I think clean water is important, so we'll take all of that. But I also believe that this problem of 1 and 2 has to be solved. It has to be solved, and that's not the focus. And so the question of the government, I do believe, so this question of are poor people richer than we think? I can't imagine how that's actually the case, but I'm sure she has some reason for thinking that is the case. From my perspective, I spend my time thinking about I am employing this government to work on my behalf, and I wonder when they're going to start working on my behalf. Just wonder. And I don't think it's ever going to happen with this particular government, but that's just me. So I thought the same thing in the United States under the Trump administration. I certainly didn't think they were working on my behalf, even though I was paying taxes. So, lots of questions. Yeah, please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question based on what you were saying around black exceptionalism, and whether you think that has implications for how we approach diversity, especially in this country. When we're talking about the government a lot, we look at a government which has had, if we want to talk about people in colour in general, we've got Kwasi, we've got Pretty, we've got these people who are people of colour, some black people, and ultimately they have wanted to kick down the ladder from underneath them, and they have seen themselves as white people with a different colour on the top. And how do we promote diversity in a way which is actually about building community, and empower people who understand that we want to build diverse organisations from the bottom to the top, and not just me, and then who cares about anyone else?
It is such an interesting question. Do you all know that I went to law school with Barack Obama? So, and he did better in life than I did. Let's just say that. Let's just admit that. And I went to university with Michelle Obama, and she did better too. But these are the people who I was surrounded by as my peer group, as I was in some of my more formative years. I have never, and they are extraordinary, right? Kamala Harris is extraordinary. These are extraordinary people. I never hear this conversation about black exceptionalism, and I never hear them separating themselves or doing anything other than sort of digging themselves deeper into a black vernacular. I mean, you know, the vernacular, not sort of language, but sort of a black experience. Barack, who's actually mixed race, have you ever heard him say the word mixed race? I mean, I'm so fascinated when I'm here in the UK, the number of people who tell me they're mixed race. It's like, what, I'm supposed to take something from that. I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to take, but I know I'm supposed to get something from that conversation. Barack, and I've known him for 30 years, I've never heard that term. So this idea of separating ourselves from others who are like us, I don't quite understand. It seems to be a strategy. I don't know where it gets you, because again, I haven't used that as a strategy, and probably I would have gotten far maybe if I had used that as a strategy, but it's used by strategy for a number of people for some reason. And it's just not one that I believe has the durability. And again, in my opinion, it has led to the results that we see today, 1 and 2. I'm going to constantly say 1 and 2. It has not led to the change that, even if people say my exceptionalism is actually driving the opportunity for others to see me as an example, and as an example, therefore, I can inspire future generations, I'm not seeing that happening. I'm not seeing that inspiration then happening to then change the dynamic that still keeps 1 and 2 of black children in poverty. That's what I would still be concerned with this state about exceptionalism. So I like your question. Good. Good for you. And do you see how I got to talk about my little network there? Wasn't that good?
We have a question over here.
Nice. That was nice.
Yeah, hi Eric. My name's Laban Rooms. Well done on the book. I'm a black businessman in this country and several other countries. But my question to you is, do you think that finding that big business that's going to employ thousands and thousands of people will change the plight of the 1 in 2 black families or black children that are living in poverty?
Absolutely. And let me tell you why. We don't have, if you look at the top 1,000 people in terms of wealth in the UK, and when I looked at that report in 2021, there were 4 black people who were in the top 1,000. So 0.whatever% of rich people. When I think about then what people of color do in terms of their capital, where they put their capital, so in terms of the philanthropy. In fact, what is the name of the report?
So it's a report published by Give Black, of which I was a founder, and it's called Valuing the Black Philanthropic Pound. It was the first examination of black philanthropy in Britain.
So black philanthropy in Britain, it's driven by a few sources. It can be driven by more. the focus of what they're going to do. When I go sit in front of the social impact investment group and I talk to them about sort of what programs they fund, and I listen to the programs that they fund, and they feel as though these are going to be, these foundations and endowments, this is the way that we can actually help Black Britain. I'm constantly like, really? Why? Haven't you seen over the years that it hasn't? But why are you continuing to go down that same route? There are certainly exigent circumstances in which they are doing things that make sense, and I'm not criticizing everything, but it's as a solution, a systemic solution. I'm not seeing the systemic solution coming from those things. And I believe when controlled by people of color, the solutions that we're looking for, the ideas that we're supporting, are much more broad and are oriented toward also the communities in which we live. When I look at this, I'm not looking specifically only at the top. These have employees, and employment means that there are people that are being paid tens of thousands of pounds. They can do whatever they want with it. I don't care. But what I want them to do, but what I think they do with it, and what has been shown by this black, what's it called again?
Philanthropy report.
Black philanthropy report, is that indeed where those monies go is somewhat different. And so that's one thing. Do we actually, when we invest in Black women, where do Black women put their money? They put it into things like real estate, and they put it into things, children's education. They put in things that are actually foundation stones. That's what happens. Those women who are employed in these organizations, and again, they're going to be employed in these organizations because they're started by other Black women, those are the sorts of things that will actually lead to changes in these communities. We're not talking about a direct link between here and here, but we are talking about a system that is creating an underpinning that makes it much more robust and able to support a lot more ideas. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, the reason for my question was that, you know, I myself grew up in abject poverty, and out the community I came from, you know, I was a lot poorer than my Black friends, but you know, my thinking was different. So what I'm saying is that, isn't it down to the thinking? You know, because you can have two people that come from the same environment, same neighborhood, but for some reason, one will excel beyond, you know, anyone's wildest dreams. And it is down to the thinking I have found in my personal life.
Look, I think that that is a very important piece, but your thinking and your ability to access capital, you have 1/4 the chance of your white colleagues to actually access capital, no matter how you think. We've got to control the ability to loan you money. So your mental state is very important. We talked about that earlier. That was the question right next to you. That mental state is extremely important. However, it does not absolve you from the other problems that will keep you from actually growing that business, keep you from then employing other people, keep you from being able to actually expand because you have the capital to be able to expand from country to country to country. It doesn't absolve you from any of that.
Okay, we'll continue another time.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
Hi.
Oh,
I wanted to challenge you. Like, I agree that, you know, having the first of many Black-owned successful FTSE companies is a great way, and obviously you will then employ more people of colour. But I think there's a big problem within the Black community is financial education and financial literacy. In the UK, and it may be different in the US, it's a very taboo subject often in your family to talk about money, to understand how money works, to borrow money, to get loans, and actually most rich people do not spend their own money, they spend other people's. And I think it's about having a big education and change of mindset and understanding how money works and how investing works. You know, when I was growing up, I wouldn't go and buy shares. I didn't know how to find a broker. We can all do this at the end of our phone now. And it's about explaining what that does and understanding how compound interest works. And I think that's how you will, within a generation, also get that 1 in 2 children of poverty to change.
I do think that there is a fantastic amount of exposure which is very, very necessary, and there is some education that is around financial literacy that's very useful. I was with my nephew, well, I've adopted him as my nephew, from San Francisco. He'd flown in for a celebration of life of his great-grandmother, and so we were spending a little time together. This young man, who is 18 months old, was using the telephone, and he was using all sort of the punch buttons. He's sort of a digital native at 18 months old, right? He knows how to find what he wants. The people who are around us, young people, Black people, actually over-index in terms of how much time and how much money we spend on technology. We over-index, right? So we spend a lot of time, we have a lot of access to various things in the world. Now, we know that there's a huge digital divide, but we have a lot of access. My thing is that I believe the same way that we can figure out when Burna Boy is coming to town, we can also figure out how to find a person who can help us to buy shares. I do believe that there is a priority question that has to also be thought about in this particular context. I don't want to blame the victim in terms of this, but I think of us as being much smarter and much more able and not have to be spoon-fed a lot of things which are available to us. And that's what I'd like to see us taking advantage of. I don't want to say that I want to then have curriculum in school that is about financial literacy. I think it's great, we should do that. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that more information is available to more people at the touch of a button than has ever been available before for free. That's what I want us to rely upon. And I'm not going to wait for us to get a curriculum about this. I'm going to say, let's find it, and those who find it will get to a place where we can actually then leverage it very, very effectively. But again, with my 18-month-old nephew can do some things, and he's a digital native, everyone can find out some of this information. I don't believe that it is hidden away from us in many ways.
I think it's the case that the people don't know what questions to ask. So you can say it's there, but I don't think people understand, the loopholes of generational wealth and inheritance and all those things. They don't even know about it to even go and look for it. But it is there, I agree with you.
I get it. I understand it. It is a challenge. It's not going to be, everyone is not going to build a big business. We don't need everyone to, though. All ships can be raised, and I can't believe I'm using a Reagan-era idea, and I think the Prime Minister's actually talked about this, but some ships can be raised by us having 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 of these businesses. There is a difference that will be made. So it doesn't have to be everybody who does it at the same time, but there are people who are ready for this to happen now, and we need to remove the systemic barriers for them to be able to make the full achievement of their potential. That's what I'm talking about. That was it.
Thank you. I feel when someone looks at me like that, I can't help it. One very last, you got the mic.
Thank you so much. Well done, Eric, for the book. To make it succinct, I'll just read what I have, and plus I have a dodgy eye at the moment. We spoke about the importance of transparency and data to make institutional change. I agree that we don't need to ask permission, but we still need to be engaged with the system to make systemic change. So my question is, what is the extent to which you are influencing the system? So, for example, UK government, the regulators. And I mention this because I know that the regulator has done a number of different kind of studies and work to ensure that the financial sector are becoming more diverse, both within the sector, but also with regards to the services and the products that they provide. And I know that they'll be very interested in your statistics, particularly when you kind of link it to the lost economic growth due to lack of an investment in the black community. And I think that that's even more pertinent now. And then my other question, so you mentioned kind of stats, sorry, this is very, very quick. You mentioned stats with regards to the black family, and I think it's extremely striking. I think, so I work in financial services, but also in international development. So the added layer to this is that a lot of these black families are also remitting money. So, and this remittances is a significant source of funds, both for developing countries, but also for this country, the UK and other kind of developed economies. So just to provide you with a little bit of stats, the World Bank stated that it was around...
I got it. So this is, you said that this was a short question.
Okay,
but
so let me just give you that question.
Okay,
so the
please.
Question here is...
I'm sorry to be, because I'm just...
No problem. There's a lot of transnational entrepreneurs, and I'm talking about Mo Ibrahim, for example, Celtel. So what's the extent to which we can collaborate? You mentioned about collaborate with those kind of transnational entrepreneurs to promote further economic development within the black community in the UK. Thank you.
Okay. So let me start with the second question, and then I'll go to the first question. So one of the things one of the reasons why we invest in Europe and the UK, think about this. The United States is a much bigger economy than the UK. If you look at the size of the UK economy is a little bit less than the size of California, a single state in the United States. So there's a very big difference in terms of its magnitude. And if you're thinking about sort of how I then become a very big company where you have an economy of that size, it's hard to do. All right, so let's put that aside. One of the things that we have done in Impact X is to say that by investing in the UK and in Europe, what we actually have is bicultural entrepreneurs. These are individuals who not only have existed within some sort of a European country for 10 generations, 2 generations, one day, but they also have some sort of a tie to another economy. Sometimes that economy is in the Caribbean, sometimes it is in a country in Africa, sometimes it's a place in the United States. That kind of bicultural knowledge and that intimate knowledge is very, very useful to actually building interesting, robust business models that can be adapted for various places. So we think that that is actually a way to do things. Partnering across borders is critical, and being able to then function across borders is actually critical. The thing that I find challenging about working with the government is, again, I don't believe that the government is the source of answers to many of the problems that we actually have, that baked into the system, and the government not willing to take on the insidious nature of white supremacy and racism, as seen with the race report, which says that there was no racism that was published last year. You know, these are things that I don't have time to try and persuade people that there is racism. I just don't have time. And if I'm going to go to the government, I'm trying to get in legislation, I have to go through all of those steps, I'll be dead. So I've got to choose a strategy which is going to actually make a difference now. Other people can choose different strategies, and I welcome other people to choose different strategies. For Eric, who has been around for 50 some odd years, and they've been a bunch of odd years, that indeed what I want to have happen is I want to have change to happen immediately. And I want to have change that I'm able to control a bit more. If I have the resources to do things, I can control the outcomes a little bit better. That's all you need to remember from this. If you don't have, and you have to go hat in hand, you've got to ask for permission, even if it's from an ally, and a very good ally, you're still asking for permission, and that can be a challenge. You might find yourself well-positioned and have more horses to really run that race. You might find yourself horses and teams pulling in different directions and not getting the results that you're looking for. I would say make deliberate choices and think specifically about these things. That's it.
So can we please just thank Eric on that, ending on that compelling note.